Hi and welcome to this latest Techfocus episode, where we'll be talking about the challenges faced by businesses on their cloud and hybrid transformation journeys. Today I'm delighted to be welcoming John Moore from ET Works to the couch. Welcome, John.
Hi, Graham.
Good to have you here. Our businesses, in terms of, and you've been a Fujitsu partner for many years, but maybe kick things off by talking to us a little bit about the relationship, how we're working together, and how we're working with customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the great thing about the way the relationship works is it truly is an ecosystem. So we have some very deep resources in terms of technologies like Nutanix. Fujitsu bring to the table their kind of stalwart in the engineering and platform, and then we have a lot of work with other ecosystem partners, which means we're not having to do everything. And to a customer, they can have a single solution, but we're not having to kind of take all of that stuff off.
And I think certainly from our perspective, our joint customers are seeing you guys as as their agnostic expert who can guide them on the journey and the challenges that they're facing in this sort of space as they move from maybe private into hybrid into cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a real risk that if you have a single approach, you're kind of blanking off some of the things on the outside that you kind of move away if you haven't got that kind of ecosystem approach.
Yeah. It's been an interesting 6-12 months in this space in terms of a lot of things happening in the industry, etc. Tell me about some of the challenges that you're hearing from customers and maybe facing day to day when you're trying to address their customer needs.
Well, I guess one of the big challenges at the moment is obviously the change with Broadcom and VMware. That's taken a lot of people, I think, by surprise. I'm not really sure why, because this has been going on for some time. And I think, unfortunately, what's happened is there's been a kind of, convergence of stuff at the same time. So, when the Broadcom deal happened, as well as a kind of restructuring in how they're going to market, there was also a restructuring in the way that they delivered packages and the fact that they moved to a subscription model, which, to be fair to Broadcom, is exactly the same model that every other business has taken in the IT space. I think for the kind of VMware market, it seemed like very different very quickly, and so it's been a bit of a disruptor in the fact that I think people just didn't think of it before, and now all of a sudden it's a strategic area they need to think of, and that's coupled at a time where there's a lot of discussion in terms of cloud open source technology, ChatGPT, and so that also has kind of displaced a lot of the comfort that people were feeling in having run those environments for sort of 15 years.
Yeah. And I guess there's more and more businesses on that transition, and whether that transition is into cloud or maybe a little bit back out of cloud into a hybrid environment, in terms of all those parameters that are there. So there's probably a lot of people with some different considerations to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, this is in a backdrop of a market that's changing rapidly, not necessarily just in terms of what's being offered in the marketplace, but also in terms of what businesses want. What businesses were asking their IT departments about, AI and things 2 years ago. It was happening in certain regions, but right now every company is having that discussion whether or not it's something they want to do tomorrow.
And I guess those considerations that businesses have got to make now in terms of things have changed, etc. What would you say are those key considerations that they really need to be looking at now if they're starting or been, part way through this journey?
I mean, I think it's the main thing at the moment is down to agility. We've moved away from this idea of we put stuff in and it'll pretty much stay the same for 5 years, and so I think there's a tendency for us to bizarrely the IT industry change all the time, and yet we're the one industry where we don't like change because it means things break and stuff. But actually that's the biggest challenge I think that kind of generally IT departments and businesses have is it's a refocus on what business outcomes are we trying to achieve? Where is the business going? And often we don't know the answer to those questions. So it's the, well, how do we build today and allow enough flexibility that we can maneuver as we move forward, rather than build on it necessarily.
Yeah, and I guess some businesses are finding themselves in a position where they've got to address changes or some of those challenges when they actually weren't really in the midst of a journey themselves, in terms of circumstances have now presented, going, oh, actually there's now some new considerations because the backdrop has changed, when I wasn't planning any kind of transformation, but maybe now I need to consider at least maybe an optimization.
Yeah, and this is a really complex field as well, right? Where every time we introduce a new thing, we'll call it cloud, but actually cloud is, there's more than one cloud destination, and if you just look at the differences between Azure, AWS, GCP, no one man can kind of do all of this stuff. And so there's also a massive transition in terms of what IT departments are capable of delivering and where their comfort is in terms of skill sets.
Yeah. And that leads nicely on, I think, in terms of to how ET Works and Fujitsu are helping customers, in this process and in that journey. Just tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from an ET Works perspective, we're an engineering-led company. I'm technically a salesperson, but it wasn't that long ago that I was running infrastructure myself. We don't have massive numbers of customers, but we have a retention of something like 97%, NPS score of 94%. And the story behind that is, we want to be on the journey with the customer and stay with customers and help them through that transition. And I guess that's bolstered by the the things that Fujitsu supply in that relationship.
Yeah.
So that we can kind of truly go and not only bring our experience, but you have you have within your tool chest a stalwart in terms of VMware. I mean, the VMware engineering knowledge inside Fujitsu is amazing. You're also supporting SUSE, Red Hat, Nutanix, and have experts in the business to do that.
Yeah, I think we're similar in that space in terms of we're always ourselves trying to be as agnostic as possible.
Yeah.
In terms, we've operated with this I guess this approach as the the right cloud for the right workload, and in terms of, and it's just looking there going, okay, well, it's application and workload based in terms of, and then determine where the right place to run that is, private, public, hybrid.
Yeah, and I think there's a big difference behind the being able to sell you a Red Hat license or sell you some Nutanix, and actually being able to offer a kind of fully blown solution that's supported in both businesses, the business that's delivering it, the business that's supporting it in the back end.
Yeah. And I know you've seen it as well as one of the key things, and I think one of the things that we can discuss with customers in terms of we're faced with this challenge now of changing costs, maybe some unexpected costs, is around how we're starting to help customers migrate or move towards much more of an OpEx rather than a CapEx model in terms of on paper use, etc., and give them a cloud-like experience with UScale, and you've seen that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that's often missed with the kind of UScale consumption-based model is actually what we're doing is adding a massive degree of flexibility. It's no longer well, look, rather than you buy 5 nodes, you only need to buy 3, and you can scale up as you go. Actually, we can say, well, look, if your business requires multiple technology stacks, you don't need to go today and fully invest in all of those areas. As you need to add them on, we can build those up in the same consumption model that you would use in Azure or AWS or anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's and that comes back to the original premise of when we started on that journey of trying to start to introduce, I guess, pay-per-use consumption. I guess you could have called it back for 4-5 years ago, was trying to emulate as much of the flexibility, the economics and the commercial model of public cloud, but delivering it in a private or hybrid environment that was totally under your control. And as you say, that flexibility, not only of scaling, but I think one thing that people also don't understand is that that approach doesn't limit you or lock you into one vendor or one cloud approach. That could comprise an estate that crossed multiple of those. At the end of the day, it's just building blocks within a U-scale consumption model that's flexible. So it's then, as you say, that's like consuming resource from a public cloud exactly the same way, but it's physical bits of kit in a data center somewhere.
Well, I would argue more flexible. So, one of the conversations we often have with customers is around cloud. When we were sold this idea of cloud, it was a cloud. It wasn't a cloud. And so, we're often finding now a lot of companies moved to you move to a public cloud provider. It's not just cost isn't the only reason that people are starting to repatriate. It's also the fact that actually right workload, right location, and you can't do that on any one cloud platform.
And I'm sure they're probably in your work with customers. There's other ways that you're looking around, I guess, optimizing their environment, tuning it for how the current situation is as well.
Yeah, so I think that the danger with the Broadcom announcement is, I think a lot of people are focused on headline cost. I used to pay this, now I'm going to pay this, and for me that's a big thing around strategy. Previously, VMware just worked in organizations, and it wasn't necessarily a kind of strategic decision. And so now all of a sudden there's a larger cost attached to that. There's almost a gut-wrenching reaction of, I don't want to pay this. But actually, there's a lot of work that I think every customer should be going through, and that's really where with ourselves we can help with that. It's what is the best package for you in terms of your current business need. That may mean, we've got customers that have reduced their VMware bill. We've also got customers that while their VMware bill has increased, they now have a larger product set, and so they can take advantage of that product set.
And maybe they stopped using other things that they had third party.
And it may mean that we can remove some of that cost elsewhere, but we can also optimize that in terms of hardware. Have you got the right number of cores per CPU to get the best value footprint? And then coupled with the likes of being able to offer U-scale in terms of, you don't have to just go out and buy a load of hardware now. We can migrate away onto this platform. Now, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done from of where the business is going and how that solution fits with a customer, rather than you're right, we can replace it with something else.
Knee-jerk reaction.
I mean, maybe not knee-jerk in the fact that if your budget just doesn't cover it, you may find yourself in a position of saying, well, I have to do something. But I think it's the why. We really, I know I'm a salesperson, and so when I start talking about value and TCO, everyone starts to glaze over. But I think it's really important that we look at what is the value that we're getting out of that cost footprint. And it doesn't matter whether that cost footprint's gone up or we're paying what we used to pay. Is that still right for the business?
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing those insights. It's been really good to hear your practical experience of that from a customer's perspective, and I'm sure the audience found that really insightful as well. So if you've been for watching, thank you very much. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to welcoming you back to a future episode of Techfocus.